Hi everyone, welcome to the final part of the final lecture of this Introduction to Phonology. In this last section, we're going to concern ourselves with intonational phenomena in English so that we can see exactly what role pitch plays in a language without any sort of lexical pitch. So, first of all, it's important to know that most varieties of English constitute so-called intonation languages, as we've defined them earlier in the lecture. These languages have stress, and all the pitch patterns found in utterances of these varieties of English is determined by information structure, which we also mentioned above. So in this section, we're going to examine the intonational contours that are added from the information structure, and then look at the phonological processes that manipulate those intonational contours, or mostly just to map those intonational contours onto the segmental string in the utterance. First, we need to define a few terms a bit more precisely, since we will need them in order to talk about what is exactly occurring in English intonational phonology. So the first term that we need to know is the term tune, which we'll use to mean one of a fixed set of possible intonational contours of the language. We can see this as the sort of intonational lexicon of the language. So when there is some meaning which is accessed, and that meaning is represented, is output phonologically as some sequence of tones. The text, on the other hand, is the segmental content and the stress patterns of an utterance. So that is basically everything that is not the intonation. Among the tones that comprise the tune, we will have starred tones, that is tone, which mean some tones that are diacritically specified to want to link to stress. Somewhat confusingly, these starred tones are also sometimes referred to as pitch accents, but we want to be careful not to confuse that with the meaning of pitch accent for a language like Japanese. And these starred tones are marked with an asterisk. There are also, although we won't talk about them really in this lecture, there are also boundary tones, which mean tones that are assigned to the edge of some domain, typically the edge of a phrase or utterance. And these are usually marked with a % sign. And throughout, we're going to use representations with autosegmental diagrams, having a tonal tier and a segmental tier, and association lines mapping the tones to the segments, just as we did with tone languages above. So given that English has an intonational lexicon, in which some meanings are realized as a sequence of tones, we will then use two rules mostly to determine the association of tones that comprise a tune to a text. The first of these is the starred tone rule, which says that the last or rightmost starred tone is to be associated with the syllable having the strongest degree of stress in the phrase. We'll begin first by just looking at individual words and then move on later to phrases. The second part of the rule says that if there are any other starred tones, that these should be associated to the second strongest stress in the phrase, or if there are no other second strongest stresses, then they should be assigned to the first syllable. The second part of our rules of English intonation is the edge rule, which states that if there are any tones after the last starred tone, then they need to be associated to the last syllable of the phrase, unless the last syllable already has a starred tone associated with it. And if there is a tone before the first starred tone, then it will be associated to the first syllable of the phrase, unless that first syllable already has a starred tone to it. So essentially, we can see these two rules together will work to attach the starred tone to the main stress of the word or whole phrase. And then the remaining tones that comprise the tune will be placed more or less at the beginning and the end of the phrase. We'll first illustrate how this works using the declarative tune, and then we'll look a bit at the question tunes as well. So the English declarative tune can be used to answer questions, and when it is used, the speaker is intending to add some shared information to the dialogue. The declarative tune has the tune structure mid-tone, high star tone, low star tone. And we could think of this even as being realized through a sort of morphological rule where an empty tonal tier gets receives the sequence mid-tone, high star tone, low tone, if the information structure is declarative. So we'll look at this, how this tone can be associated to three words that comprise a single phrase and utterance to see how the starred tone rule and the edge rule operate. Let's begin with the four-syllable word Alabama. So this word has a primary stress on the first syllable and a secondary stress on the first syllable and two unstressed syllables. So we begin with our two tiers, our segmental tier, Alabama, and our tonal tier, mid-tone, high star tone, low tone. So first, the starred tone rule will apply and associate the high star tone to the primary stress in this word. And subsequently, the edge rule will take place. At this point, we see there are no other starred tones. And so the edge rule will then work to associate the two other tones, the mid-tone and the low tone. So the mid-tone will be attached to the first syllable and the low tone to the last syllable. Let me state this word again with the English declarative tone, Alabama, Alabama. And the ultimate output is as follows. We'll talk in a second what the pitch will be like for this syllable which has not been associated with any tone from the declarative tune. Let's consider another example, the word Michigan, which has primary stress on the first syllable. In this case, the high star tone will be attached to the first syllable, meaning that when the edge rule applies, the mid-tone cannot associate to the first tone. It is blocked there, and the low tone will simply associate into the last syllable. So here's our ultimate output. I've taken away the mid-tone here. And a third example, Timbuktu. Here, we have a primary stress on the final of three syllables. So we begin with the declarative tone and our segmental string again. The starred tone rule will associate the high star tone to this final syllable, which then means that when the edge rule applies, the low tone has no place to go. It can't be associated with the final syllable, whereas the mid-tone is able to associate with the first syllable, thereby leaving the output Timbuktu. So we can ask ourselves the question in these last two examples, what actually happens to any tones that are part of a tune that cannot be associated to a syllable? Well, I think here it should be fairly intuitive that if a tone is not associated to a syllable, then it can't be pronounced. And then whether we assume that the unassociated tone is deleted, which is what I've assumed here between the edge rule and the output for the outputs Michigan and Timbuktu. Some tones have simply disappeared. Or if we imagine that those tones are still floating there, being unpronounced, that makes no difference. A more concrete or a question with more implications is what happens to syllables that are not associated with any tune, which we can see in the case of Alabama. Here we have a syllable, la, which has not been associated to any tune. In that case, the pitch is interpolated between the pitch targets of syllables associated with tones. So concretely, this means that the pitch of the la, the syllable la in Alabama, will come to be somewhat in between the mid-tone associated to the first syllable and the high star tone of the third syllable with the primary stress. So now that we've seen a first example of how a tune can be associated to a text using the starred tone rule and the edge rule, let's consider two other types of two other tunes of English. One is the regular question tune, which is used for a normal information seeking question. And the other is the emphatic question tune, which asks for confirmation of some surprising information. The only difference between these two tunes is whether the first tone is a low tone or a mid tone. So let's consider first the application of the regular question tune to the phrase, "Are you going?" In this case, what will first happen? Let me try to annotate and draw how this will work. So I'll draw the tier here. In this case, by the starred tone rule, the low star tone in the regular question tune will first associate to the stress with the primary syllable. And since there are enough syllables in this case, then by the edge rule, the first syllable R can be associated with a low tone as well. And the final syllable of this phrase will be associated with the high tone belonging to that tune. Are you going? And so when we have this phrase, because we have just one most prominent syllable here, go, that gets associated with the starred tone. And since there is one syllable following the starred tone, the high tone is able to be realized on that final syllable. And we can hear that pitch rise on the final syllable. Let's clear the drawing now. And let's consider then the association of the emphatic question tune to at least one of the place names discussed above. Let's consider the place name Alabama once again. So type in, oops, sorry, have some problems here. Let's close that. Oh, somehow I'm blocked here. Okay, so we need to change our keyboard. The hex input, remove this. All right, now I need to type in the word Alabama down here. Move to annotation once again. And we'll add the primary stress and the secondary stress. Okay, so we have primary and secondary stress here. And so when we add the emphatic question tune, so the emphatic question tune would be used in case someone is surprised, Alabama, by the information that they've just received. And we can see that the tone association will proceed pretty similarly as with the declarative tune. First, by the starred tone rule, the starred low tone here will associate to the syllable with the primary stress. And then by the edge rule, since there are no other starred tones, by the edge rule, the mid-tone will associate to the first syllable, and a high tone will associate to the last syllable. Okay, now that we've introduced some terminology for talking about intonation, and we've seen how the starred tone rule and the edge rule can account for the association of tones of tunes to segmental sequences in English. Let's pause before looking at some work with a couple of other tunes in English that involve more different starred tones.